All right. And let me get rid of that. Okay, I think we're looking good. So we should. Are we ready to get started?
Yeah, I can go. Um,
Sure.
well, yeah, well, welcome everybody to the Blender add-on live stream. Yeah, my partner Imaginer has been contributing a lot during the add-on development. It's been super helpful. Yeah, here we are to show you the new features of the latest add-on version. Um, Yeah, I guess we can start. I put like a link the script and the wiki page down there. I guess it's just for you, Chris, KB. Um, Otherwise, I'm gonna stream my second screen up there so you can follow whatever I'm talking about. Um, we have divided the presentation in like a part for devs and another part for artists. So I'm going to start with the devs part, and then we'll go over the artist part. So first of all, what is a beta? What does it mean? So for devs, what we want from this beta is first that you use it and you break it and report bugs, um, and you report any improvements, uh, suggestions, anything you can think of. Um, and then we will go over that. And also another thing that we wanted with this new add-on version is like to bring more developers to the platform. So one of the main goals was to make it easier for developers to make components for Hubs on the render side, because in the previous version the add-on functionality was very limited. You could only create basically add properties to components, and that was it. You couldn't add any logic or anything else. So it was basically adding properties to components and exporting that in the GLTF. So with this add-on version, you can do more stuff, and I think that will be interesting for developers. Yeah. Um, yeah, anybody can anybody can ask questions anytime, just in case, or imagine if you especially like whatever you want to add to what I said, like go ahead and add it.
Oh, I just want to say that it is much nicer to work with the new architecture. I've played around with both the old architecture and the new architecture, and the new one is so much nicer to work in. It's great.
Yeah, yeah, I think this is much more stuff that you can do compared to the previous one. Especially if you are a developer like you, I think that's more interesting than just adding like fields to like or properties to a JSON and then getting that exposed. So that's super limited, and now we can do more stuff. So yeah, hopefully that attracts more contributors and developers to add new components to the platform, or just improve the add-on generally. So how does the new add-on look like? Well, I have that's gonna be like a super inception, because we're gonna have in Blender, and I'm gonna just put Blender again. So now we have like double Blender there. So well, in general, this looks like the previous one. So it's not many differences right now. So you will find the same export menus when you export. So this menu hasn't changed. This is enable, disable the add-on export. The components are the same, so we haven't really added many new components. So it's basically what we have. So you have the scene components where they used to be, environment, audio fog. They have the object components. We have added icons to the menu. So you can see, yeah, it's like a nice addition. It's, instead of the plus icon that was quite boring. These are just the
to bump up the menus a little bit. Sorry, Manuel.
oh yeah, sorry, yeah,
a little bit. Yeah, thank you so much.
yeah, forgot about that. Yeah.
Yes.
That should be better. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, this. Well, I think that menu can be zoom in, but yeah, you get the idea. This is basically the same components, just new icons, and then all the classic like material components, and we also have like bonds components as we used to do in the past. So that hasn't changed that much. Visually,
I just wanted to mention that they are more constrained now. They are based off of object type. So reflection probes, they're on the light probe reflection cube map Blender object, and so yeah.
Yeah, like now whenever you, for example, you add like a reflection cube map, now you can see that here you see the reflection probe, and you can add that only to reflection cube map object type. So if I select any object type, I go there, I don't see it because it's not available, because that component or that object doesn't meet the constraints for that component. So that's something that now we can do, so that we can constrain which components go in which objects, and we can do it basically with a polling method that we'll see later. So you can poll the object, the component, say like, oh, does this object meet the criteria to add this component to it? And then if that's a yes, then we show the component in the menu. Otherwise, we don't. So that's kind of improvement, because before you could add any component to any object, and that led to confusion. Especially even me, I had issues at the beginning with adding the reflection probe, because you don't know that this has to be added to the reflection probe object type. And then you add it, and then it doesn't work, and you wonder why. And then you don't even have a warning. Now we added like warnings, some visual feedback for the artist to know what's going on. So I think that's been like already a great improvement. Well, as I said, like this, basically, we'll go over some of these improvements for usability later. But visually, the major changes being Gizmos. Gizmo is this visual cue. So in Blender, you have it, you use it for everything. If you add a camera, the camera will have the Gizmo camera. The light has the Gizmo light. So we have added the option to add Gizmos to components. So right now it's only the waypoint. So this one is just empty. So if you add like any object, so let's see, we have like a cube. We have the cube. Here we go components, and we add the waypoint. So that object gets the Gizmo. That the Gizmo is going to follow all the object transforms. You can add Gizmos will appear in objects or also bonds. So you will see that visual cue for a few components. We are working on more designs for others. So right now it's only waypoints, audio zones, and media frames.
Yes.
But yeah, that's a new feature.
Now, with bones, it's still a bit of a work in progress. So we will be improving that, but yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I love the fact that I can now see which direction my waypoints are facing easily. Before with the empty, it was just so hard to pick them out, and now it's so easy.
Yeah, I think it's also very useful for media frames and anything that has like a volume, because before that you have to try and see how it's looking, perhaps go back, change the for example, media
Yep.
frame, you have to change the bounds, and now you can just change it.
Yes.
And it's refreshed directly in the viewport. So now you have like the exact, you know exactly how's it gonna look like. Same for audio sounds, which work a little bit different to media frames. They use the object scale versus the bounds that you define, but you also get the visual cue from for the audio sounds there. So that's that's kind of nice. They have more information about what you are doing in the Blender viewport. So I think that's going to be helpful.
Yeah, makes iterating so much faster.
Yeah, that's one of the goals also of this add-on version is like trying to cut the iteration times, because that's one of the most painful things for artists. They just have to go back and forth, try things, see how they look, go back, change. Think that you lose a lot of time doing that, and we should be able to improve that so people can iterate faster. So we jump right into like seeing what the Blender add-on looks like. Which is basically as I said, like mostly the same with Gizmos and a few usability improvements. We will go over that a bit later. So as this part is for devs, we're gonna go a little bit over the new add-on architecture. So let's see how that looks like. I have a note here. So there is a tutorial about how to create a new components. So if you are a developer, you can just take a look at that. There is like a guide, like step by step to how to create a component. It's an explanation of the different classes, the different parts that's the new architecture, and if you feel like that's not enough, or you find any mistakes there, just let us know. Just report it or open an issue in GitHub, and we'll improve that over time. Or any other guys that you think that we could write, or do you think that you can write, just go ahead and do it and contribute that. That would be great. So yes, I'm going to show some code here. Well, first I'm going to go over the binary structure, usually folder structure. So here is how the new add-on looks like. The general folder structure is different from the previous one. Now, in the previous one was like a kind of flat sort of hierarchy, so you only have like the files there. And that was a good side, that you could just get the source code zip file and just use it as the add-on in Blender. So you can just install zip, you could install that. But that was limiting the amount of things that we could do, or things that we can bundle inside the repository. So for example, now we have tests, and that's something that we didn't have before. And the tests live outside the add-on source code. So we have changed that structure, and now we have the test folder. Like in the root folder, you have all the licensing, README, setup that we had before. Now we have like a test folder with all the tests. A GitHub folder for all the like GitHub action workflows, and then inside the add-ons we have right now we only have one add-on. In the future, well, maybe it's not. I guess it will only be one, but this is so. IO Hubs add-on is what the add-on itself, the source code. There's another folder here. It's called scripts. We'll go over this later. But it's basically this is helper scripts that you might need for all things outside the add-on source code. In this case, this is for exporting Gizmos, so exporting models for Blender into the Gizmo format that the Blender API, Blender Python API requires. So yeah, the IO Hubs add-on is the source code of the Blender add-on. The components folder has everything related to components, which is mainly definitions, which is every component that we have available. This is not like a flat sort of folder, but you could create folders inside. So say that you want to create like a more complex, you can just divide your source, the component code into different files. So you can create just a new folder and say my component. Then we can start creating things inside here. Let me delete this. Yeah, the registry will load everything in there. So you can create folders inside the definitions. Then icons folder. This is just a way to a place to drop any icons that you want to use in menus. Right now we only have the spam point icon. I have reused mostly, as you can see here. So most of the most of the icons that we are using is just the built-in Blender icons. But in case anybody needs to add a new icon, you can just drop it in there, and then you can just use it like this. So just put the icon name there, and then the registry will look into that icons folder, and then we'll get that icon from there.
Yeah, and
then,
I want to mention about icons. You should keep them as a white icon because at least my plan is to add in some code I've worked with on another add-on so that we change the icons to work with the Blender theme, the color. So for that to work properly, you'll want to use a white icon.
yeah, good point. Yeah, that's true. And also keep them small. So
Yes.
I think we don't really need a big icon. I think this one, I don't remember how much, but it's like maybe 128 or something like that, or even less. I don't remember.
Yep.
So don't use huge icons. Just keep them small.
Yep.
Then we have the models folder. So this is basically this is models that we use, and now we are just using them for Gizmos. So this is like the Gizmos model folder. This is like the format is like a couple of like vertices basically. So it's nothing else. So they don't have textures or any fancy features. It's just like this is the mesh. So they look basically gray, as you can see in here. So you can tint them in any color. For example, the audio song one is tinted in green, or the media frame one is in blue. But you can use textures or materials in there. So it's pretty basic. So yeah, here is where you should save any models that you can export using that script that we will talk about later. So yeah, this folder is just for models. And the rest is the main parts of the new architecture is, well, the central part is the component registry. The component registry basically traverses these definitions folder and loads every component. And then it does some things like creates the properties in the objects. So you have like different object types. So you have the different like tabs, components leads, or any other component. You have the property in the object already. And then other than that, is just loads of components, registers them and register. Yeah, basically that. So whenever you add a new component, then the registry is gonna load it whenever you run Blender and the add-on is enabled. There is a few constants there, which is like things that we use across different components. So like interpolation modes, transparency. So these are used in a few different modules. If you are just going to use it in your own component, there's no need of adding it here. You can just keep it inside the component source code. Then Gizmos is basically all the code that handles the Gizmo creation, updating, and drawing. So yeah, there's a few classes here. There's a custom model Gizmo, which handles loading specific models from the models folder. And there's the Gizmo group, which is what Blender uses for drawing gizmos. So it's basically you create gizmos, you add it to the group, and then that paints the gizmos every time that needs to be refreshed. So it has like basically like a setup method that creates the gizmos, and a refresh method that calls the update method from the different gizmos and just like draw them. The handlers, this is like a few different handlers that we use for doing different things. There are, for example, load post migrate components. So whenever you load the new Blender file, after that we just migrate all the components. So that file that you are loading has the previous the components that were saved with the last version that you were using before when you save the file, and these will check on that and migrate in case there's any migration to be done. Then go over all the components and check like, do you need to migrate anything? So like, yes, okay, let's that's the migration, and the same for and save pre is something that is in charge of the version update. So whenever you save, this will persist the version, the add-on version that you are using into the blend file. So whenever you load the file next, we can check for if there is any migration necessary based on that add-on version that you had before. Again, this is probably the class that developers are going to use the most. It's the base class for the Hubs component. It has like the main thing is the definitions. So in case you are creating just like a component with only properties, then probably you only need to fill this. Otherwise, you might need to override some methods, but this is the main component properties. So the properties that we have right now is like the name of the component, which is the name that will be used when the component exports the GLTF. So that's the name of the component that will be used there. Display name is what is going to be used in any UI. Category is what you see here. So whenever you add a component, we have like a few categories: elements, scene, object, animation, avatar. So that will just add that component into that category from that panel. The node type is in what type of node the component is going to be added to. So basically, now we have material, node, and scene because that's what we support now, this type of components. So yeah, that should be enough. We can extend that, but I'm not sure right now if we ever, or in which cases we will need to do that. So far, this has been enough. The panel type is in which panel is going to be displayed. So the different panel types are, for example, this is the object panel. Then you have the scene. This one, scene panel. So now we support material, bone, object data, and scene. So you can show components in those panels right now in one of them or multiple, so you can just have like different panel types. You can add more there in case you need the component. If the component supports more than one object type, which is usually the case, for example, with components that can be attached to objects and bonds, which are the majority of them. So in that case, you will probably want to add both object and bond to the panel type.
And those all live in the types file, types.py down there, if you want to check them out and see what's available.
Yeah, so all the different types that we're using are here. So panel type, node type, and category. Then dependencies. Dependencies is is any other component that this component depends on. So whenever this component is loaded, the registry will check this array and will add. No, sorry. Whenever you add this component, we will add any dependency to the same object without you needing to add it manually. In the previous version, we did it in a different way. So, for example, the main dependency right now is networked, which a few components require. So before this, we only did that at export time. So whenever we were clicking on export, in that moment we were adding the component to the output GLTF file. Now we are handling different ways. So we are doing it whenever you click on the object, so that information is persisted in the blend file. So now you have information of what components this object has for real. So any dependency is going to be also there and will show immediately in the components panel. So for example, let's say we add like audio. So this immediately adds a networked component, which is required by audio, and an audio params component, which is also a dependency from audio. So those two components are added immediately, and they don't have a remove button, as you can see, so you can't really remove them because that's something that you can only do through the main component that added them. So whenever you remove them, then all of them are removed. If there are like more than one component that uses that dependency, for example, video also requires a networked component and audio params. So if I remove the original audio component, the network and audio params are not removed because there's still a component that uses them. So all this dependency management is now handled by the registry. So I'm trying to book video. That's gone. Before this, if you added the component with the dependency, for example, audio, we added the dependency and you could see the dependency there. But you have to remove it manually. And also, if you add two different components with the same dependency, that dependency will be duplicated because that dependency information only lived in the JSON file, and the add-on wasn't smart enough to know, oh, yeah, so this component is already added, so I don't have to, this is dependency. So now all that is handled automatically. So I think that's also like a usability improvement and less pain. Finally, the icon field, which is what we mentioned before. So it's just the icon, which can be, as you can see here, a Blender built-in, or it can be like an image. I think it's JPEG and PNG, or probably BMP. I don't remember the formats, but well, you're probably good with JPEG or PNG. Yeah, so
you probably want to do PNG because JPEGs don't support transparency.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah, PNG is probably the format. Yeah, I only required it for waypoint, so it's only one one icon right now. But well, that's an option in case you want something fancier for a component. Okay, let me check. Yeah, component definition. Yeah. So, well, we can take a quick look, because a lot of this is explained in that document from the wiki that I was talking about. So we don't need to really go too deep into exploring these methods, but yeah, the most important ones, we'll say like draw. So this is what, this is what draws the panel. So the code here is gonna like draw the component panel in here. So in the waypoint, all this that you see here inside the waypoint panel, you can draw it using overriding this method. By default, this method just draws the properties as the previous add-on did. So like any properties that you have defined, for example, the weight dot component defines like a few properties. So all these will be automatically drawn there based on the type, which Blender already does. So you don't have to do much. It's just handled automatically by Blender, and we just like go over all those properties and just draw them. So that's the most basic thing. So in that case, the component will behave exactly as the previous one, but instead of defining the properties in the JSON file, you need to add them here as Blender API props. So you can see that this one has mostly Boolean properties, so this will see like, well, this is how Blender defines properties in general. So it's, if you are familiar with Blender, then you should have many issues with this.
Yep.
But you have also like a pre-export method, which basically is something that it's called before the component is exported. So this can be useful in some specific cases. For example, if you want to say apply the object transform before exporting, so the component is the object is exported with the transforms applied, and then you want to revert that. So then you could use the pre-export methods and the post-export method to do that, and then the component will be exported with the transform apply. So that can be interesting in some cases. We don't use it that much right now, but maybe for some specific cases could be useful. Gather is basically what gets all the properties from the different objects components, and this like creates the JSON output based on those properties. So in most cases, you're okay with just the default behavior. There's this one, but some of the cases you might want to override it. For example, I think we override in not here.
It's media frames.
Yeah, this one also. So for example, here we we override the gather method in audio target because we need to know if it's attached to a bone or an object, and based on that, just do different things. So in most cases, you are okay with the default behavior, but in some cases, you might need to do something special when exporting. So this is what you should override, and you just return this object, which has like a key for the property. Because by default, it's just that the properties that you have defined there, and then the value, whatever it is. It can be also useful in the case that you have a component where you have added more properties that you want to export. For example, this one also has like a few helper properties like bone ID, bone also. So we don't want to export all these. By default, the behavior will be to export all of them, but if you override the gather method, then you can export only like a subset of them, whatever you need to export.
Yeah, and if you add the hidden property to the options part of the Blender property, it will by default not display in your draw method, in your UI. So you can control that.
You can hide it. Yeah. Okay. Other useful methods, migrate. For example, this is used for in the case that the component needs to migrate data. Say that you have a previous version of the component, and then you want to migrate, or you update the component, and you have removed fields and updated other fields, and then you want to migrate. So you should need to override this migrate method, and then you get to play with the version, minor patch, and you can compare that to the current add-on version, and then you can do whatever you need to do. This, as we've seen before, is called right after the blend file is loaded. So it still has the previous um, um, add-on component information there, so you can just migrate at this point.
Yeah, and if you're changing like data field types, like properties that are being modified themselves, like changing the size of a vector or something like that, uh, you will need to initially register the old type and then gather the data from that and then register the new type in the migrate method. So it can be a bit complicated, but otherwise Blender will just not read your data if you don't start from the old type. Just putting that out there because it's a lesser known thing, and it caught me up for a while. So
yeah, there are some cases that might be tricky.
yeah,
In most cases, I think you can live with just like the
yeah. Most cases it'll be very easy.
yeah, probably very very simple, but yeah, you can do more complex stuff.
Yeah.
Well, this one is quite also interesting. This is a poll method, which is a method that exists in most of the Blender API classes or like panels, um, operators.
Yeah.
All of them have a poll method. It's a way of filtering basically. So you just return true or false based on if you want to the poll is successful or not, and we use it. Yeah, you want to display things or the these components. In this case, we use it to know if the component panel needs to be drawn. For example, this waypoint panel here that we're drawing, before being drawn, it will check the poll method. The poll method by default returns true, so every component will be drawn. But there is some cases where some components they are not. For example, reflection proofs that we've seen before overrides that method and checks if the current selected object is a light proof. Otherwise, it doesn't show the panel. So yeah, as we saw before, like for example, the light proof component is not displayed here, but if you add like a light proof object here, then it shows. So it's basically displaying it here or not is based on that polling that you can that's overriding here. So that's pretty to keep in mind because it's going to help you limit where the component is going to be displayed, and that's going to help artists a lot because they don't need to bother adding components that don't work on certain objects because they don't make sense there, and you can help them not get confused with that and just filter, just show components where they make sense to be shown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, well, this is the also a couple of components that most of the classes or a lot of them have. This is register. So this is called when the component is registered. So then you can put here anything that you need. I think we do some cases we need to register specific things inside the component. For example, look for yes, this is here. For example, the loop animation component that's to register a few things that few classes that is using the UI list, for example. So you might need to do that in some cases. So you can do it with the register and unregister methods there. And yeah, that's basically the component structure.
One more I want to mention. There's also an init method that you can override, and that gets called on the component actually getting added to the panel. One thing I do want to mention is it will not get called if an object is duplicated, so you should be aware of that. But it is kind of a nice feature because it's generally pretty hard to do stuff after something has been initialized in Blender, because the regular Python init methods they don't work in Blender. So if you need to do some setup after someone clicks on the add component button, then that will allow you to do it.
Actually, we're not using that right now, but I think during development I found some cases where it will be interesting, so I just added it just in case it will be useful in the future. So yeah, so that's another good one. Okay, so well, that's basically the add-on architecture in a nutshell. As I said, probably the best thing to do, because it was real quick, is to check the wiki. Now the wiki has some general information, but the interesting part for developers, which is what we are talking about now, is these two parts: environment setup and how to create a custom component. So environment setup is all about how to set up your computer, your environment to start developing. There's a few things that are quite helpful. For example, instead of installing from a zip file, just being able to launch or to load the add-on directly from the source code folder. So then you can learn how to do that here, because that way you can easily change code and then reload. You will get the add-on updated instead of uninstalling the zip, which is maybe the way most people are familiar with. So that's important. That's going to save you a lot of time if you do that. Another thing is what code completion. There is this setup script that helps you install this library, which is basically the fake API models from Blender. So you can have code completion inside Blender. So whenever you try to, you can see inspect the class's structure or complete the code. So that's quite helpful when you are developing. You can install.
To be honest, I just use Blender's Python console and its code completion. So that's also a really nice tool, and it very helpful for debugging, because you can work on objects and data live and get live readouts of stuff and kind of prototype what your code is doing before you or while you're developing it.
Yeah, definitely. That's super helpful, and I've used that a lot, especially at the beginning. Maybe you don't know, you don't know the API that much, and you can just inspect every object, see all the properties, and just try things in there live, and then just instead of loading and loading the Blender add-on, which is a slow process, you can just try things straight from the Blender console. So yeah, I definitely use the console as much as you can. That's very helpful. But yeah, code completion when you are on the editor side and might also help you. You don't have to do this. This is completely optional. So if you feel like it will help you, you can just add it. But yeah, another thing that I thought was super helpful is setting up the debugger. It's not complicated, and it really helps to figure out certain situations where you can the back live from the vendor console, and you need just to set a breakpoint and see what's going on. So that's something that's quite helpful too. So yeah, sorry, was
Fantastic.
somebody?
Yes. Could I just jump in
No.
with a quick question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So now that we have sort of all this background on how to set up dev for the Blender add-on, what are some components or some sort of first steps you would like to see if people want to contribute something, or like what are kind of your do you have any like particular features or components you'd like to or improvements that you'd like to see?
Well, I will certainly start by taking a look at the GitHub issues list, because we have like quite a few, not a lot actually in the Blender side, but we have a few issues that I've been trying to open and persist all the things that we see, or all the issues that I see there, just so in case any contributors want to jump in and contribute some code, I will start from there, because that's what's more pressing, like fixing those things. So definitely that's a good starting point. If you're interested, just first take a look at these documents about how to set up the environment, create custom components, and then just go to the issues um, on GitHub, and then you can see there that there are different issues from more complicated to easier. Probably we need to tag those, so like good first start issues, or different levels of the difficulty, or even like priority. But yeah, definitely that's a good starting point.
Yep. Off the top of my head, I think the mirror component and the camera component, you can do cameras already just by naming an empty, but make that a little nicer as a component. And trigger volume is one I have heard requested a lot, so that's probably going to be one that gets added. And if someone wants to do that, that would be helpful. I know. Dom hates trigger volume, but it does work in some cases, so it'll probably get added for at least now.
Yeah, well, there's also like a few things that we have in Spoke that we don't have in the Blender add-on. So yeah, I mean, having parity might be interesting. So for example, I think the camera preview component is not available in the Blender add-on yet. So that's something that should be added for sure. Or just what Maginer mentioned about the trigger volume, the mirror components. So this is a few components that are not yet in the Blender add-on. So if that will also be helpful, like migrating those to the Blender add-on. Well, I don't think there are many, but yeah, there are a few. So, but yeah, definitely we'll start with issues, and then just add components, or in general just give feedback. The feedback already will be pretty useful, like knowing what developers miss, how can we improve the current architecture to enable more features, or more, so developers can do more. So yeah, that would be nice to hear. Okay, let's jump into the next section. So yeah, that's basically the add-on architecture, the guides. So you want to check what I mentioned about these guides about how to create your first component. This is a very straightforward guide. So just basically
Oh, whoa. I just lost all audio.
Yeah, I'm not hearing Manuel anymore, and his screen share is black for me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
I think I just lost Manuel.
Yeah, me too. He's back. Hey, Manuel.
Hello?
You're
Are
muted.
you muted? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and I think something happened with our cameras as well. I don't know, so I'm gonna just refresh those.
Okay.
I think my connection is sometimes unstable for some reason. I disconnect.
Yeah, mine sometimes is too, but thankfully it's been okay today. Fingers crossed it stays that way.
Yeah, it's a bit okay. So we should be back up here. All right, sorry about that, folks.
Okay, we'll go back. Okay, well, I was mentioning that the guide. So yeah, basically you go step by step. You follow this, you will end up with a mirror component that you can export from the Blender add-on into Hubs, and it will work because, as I mentioned, the mirror component already exists in Hubs, in the Hubs client. So that's a good way of practicing and understanding how the architecture and how it works, the different methods. How to add logic to your component, how to add like a gizmo to your component. Well, all that is explained here, so just check it out before working on the Blender add-on development. And just if you need ask questions or you need anything, we are always in the Discord Blender add-on channel, so you can ask questions there. We'll be happy to answer. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, so we went over the new architecture. Yeah, well, we mentioned the Gizmos before. And you can add Gizmo support to your component if you want to. There is like 3 Gizmos right now: waypoint, audio sounds, and media frames, which actually you can see in this room. So if you take a look to the right and left side, that's how the the audio sounds components will look inside Blender. Exactly, it's that frame that is around the object, and then at the back of the room there's like the media frame Gizmo too. So yeah, the Gizmo types that we support now is basically built-in Gizmos, which is whatever Blender supports. There is like there's a list of those that you can check out. And you don't find them so helpful. It's very limited. This is like basically boxes and different arrow types, and but not so many. So you probably will want to use your own model. And if that's the case, that you can use the custom Gizmo model class that we mentioned before, which lives inside the Gizmo .py, which is up here. And this inherits from Gizmo, and basically just like a supporting class for loading the shape and drawing it. So it doesn't do much more than that. So it just loads the model and draws it. So we are using this right now in a few classes. For example, a few components, the waypoint one. So here you can see that we get you override this method, which is the component create Gizmo method. So you override that and you get the object and a Gizmo group. We only use one Gizmo group for drawing all the Gizmos right now. So you get that Gizmo group, but from there you can create the new Gizmo using the custom model Gizmo class. And you get a Gizmo. You can set different properties. In the case of the custom Gizmo, the most important one is setting the object that is gonna draw that gizmo, and then setting this attribute, which is the gizmo shape, and point that to whatever the shape you want to load. The shape is what we saw before, that is loaded from the models folder. So all the shapes are here, and you can export any shape using the Gizmo script. So that's going to make things easier, hopefully. So yeah, and otherwise it's just basically create the Gizmo, return the Gizmo, and set the properties here. And then there's another method that is update Gizmo, which is pretty important. It's basically setting up all the matrices for the Gizmo, the transform matrix, so it draws correctly based on the object position or whatever you want to draw it based on, like for example for bounds or objects. But you can do anything that you want here. You can transform the Gizmo any way that you want, and just update the matrix spaces, and that will draw the Gizmo in whatever you want to be drawn. So you get here an object and a bond, which is in case you want to draw, attach it to the object or the bond, and the Gizmo. So
and bones do need to be handled a little differently because they work via Y up instead of Blender's normal Z up. So we have a helper function for that. But if you need to do anything special, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, for now we have this bond matrix wall method. So here we're already accounting for that axis switch, but you can use any. As I said, you can do any transform that you want there, but probably maybe this could be helpful because it's basically throws the Gizmo whatever the bond is. So it's the most basic behavior. And then there's another one that is Gizmo update, which is the default behavior of a Gizmo if you don't override the Gizmo update method in the component, which just draws the Gizmo wherever the object is, basically. So just copies the matrix, and then that's the matrix that's going to be applied to the Gizmo. So that's probably the most basic behavior. But you can do anything that you want here, as long as you update the Gizmo matrix basis. You can do anything. Yeah, so yeah, you can use the built-in Gizmos or a specific shape, and the way you can export shapes is using this export Gizmo script. So yeah, you just need to copy paste this, go to Blender. Copy this, go to Blender, select an object, and then create a new script. You copy that, and when you click on run the script, then that will open like a file browser. Then you can go to any folder and export. So here we save the. Oh, sorry, what happened? Okay, I think I need to set a name. That's it. So yeah. So for example, we can export add-ons. Add-on, then here in components, models. Then we say like we say Gizmo, and we go to the models. Components models. Sorry, I have to put PI. Yeah, well, yeah, it failed obviously because this is not a mesh. This is here curve. So if you do it with any other mesh, then it should work. Component models that, yeah, there we go. So then here you have the output Gizmo mesh, and then you can go back and use that mesh in your shape here. Oh. Okay, so that is basically how you can add a Gizmo to your component. Well, migration support, we already went over that. So basically, you override the migrate method, you get the version tuple with the major minor, and that's from the add-on, and then you can do whatever you want there, migrate your component anyway. CI and testing. So yeah, one of the also like important new features is that we added support for continuous integration and most importantly testing. The tests live. Oh, this is here. The tests live in the test folder outside the add-on source code, and here you have a test export JS file where you can add any testing for any component. The way it works right now is we have a folder, the scenes folder, so you create your scene here with your component. You can keep it like as simple as you can, so just the component itself and nothing else, no, just to keep it clean and so that the blend file doesn't take too much size. And then here you can create a new test. For example, like an example of a test would be this one, for example, the simple water. So you load the GLTF, which is going to be exported. The test should automatically export the GLTF from the blend file. So it takes the name of the blend file and exports a GLTF, loads that, and compares that to like the expected output here. So yeah, that way to make sure that if you change anything in the future from the component, then if you break it, then you can, the test is going to fail. So that way, as in like, is the only test that we are doing for now is that. So just checking the output from the blend file export with whatever you have in your test here in the test export. So it's pretty simple, but at least now we can know whenever we break things at the export level. If you break any of the things inside the Python code, we're not gonna know through tests. But at least now we can test like output, which is already something. But maybe it would be interesting to have some unit testing for different architecture parts, like for example the component registry. That would be maybe interesting at some point, but right now we don't have any of that. So if anybody wants to contribute that, that's also would be nice. But yeah, one thing I missed actually about the migration before is that right now the migration we only provide version information from the add-on at an add-on level. So the version that you get here is the add-on version. Maybe in the future it will be interesting to add per component versioning. I don't know, not sure, but
possible.
Yeah, but right now it's only at the add-on level. So whenever the add-on changes, you have to make sure that the add-on version has changed. Otherwise, there's not going to be migration. Yeah. So yeah, that's about testing, and well, the docs and guides is basically what we talked about before. It's the wiki page. You can check the guides there, and yeah, let them know if there is anything that you need or anything else we can create guides for or documentation for. So anything that's missing just will be helpful to know, so we can work on that.
Now,
yeah, no.
One more thing with the testing. I know the GLTF export is basically unordered. So is that going to matter with the tests? Which order the settings are specified in?
So whenever you export, as long as the blend file doesn't change, the export, the output GLTF elements order is going to stay the same, so it shouldn't really matter that much. But maybe at some point, I'm not sure if at some point the exporter is going to change the order somehow, and then all the tests will break. But then that will be easy to figure out because we will see that, oh, this Blender person has changed something. But so far, I haven't seen any changes in that regard. So the structure is always the same. And yeah, so I don't see that should be any problem with that.
Good. Okay.
And also the test files are the test blend files are usually, well, the ones that they are here are super simple. It's just
yes.
If you are testing a component, this is an empty with a component, so you're exporting one object. One thing that would be nice, and we show during the development, is like in more complex scenarios where you have like different elements, maybe like you set up a complex scene. Will be nice to test also more complicated cases than just one component in one empty scene. But so far, this is what we have now. So every blend file is just one component, or unless there's a couple of exceptions to that, which is the video texture, which is two components because the source and the target, and the audio target and audio source, because it kind of makes sense that you test both components at the same time because they depend on each other. But otherwise, it's just one component per file, and it's usually an empty with a component attached. So it's a very simple case, but at least we have an idea of if we have broken anything. So that's.
Would you suggest like adding in a component both on an object and on a bone in the same file, or using separate files for that? Because
yeah, I mean, I think
bones don't break.
Yeah, I think it's fine if you add both in the same file. It shouldn't. Yeah, I think that's okay. Actually, that's one of the things that I also want to add: tests for components in bones, because when I added these tests, we still didn't have bone support for most of the components, so I didn't add that case. But ideally, all these tests should also test that the components attached to bones are exported correctly, and the whole structure is exported correctly, because as I said, some components depend on each other, so we want to make sure if we break something from the bone export, then we know that. And right now the test case is too simple. It's just attaching to an object. So definitely that should be the next step, like just adding test cases for bones. Yeah, that's important, because as we have seen, that the bone exporting some cases more complicated and it could be trickier. So that would be good to check. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. The thing with that, we are done with the dev part. The artifacts will be much faster, so because we are already, it's already 1 hour. Time goes fast. So we'll start with the same point, like what's better for artists. So in this case, it's completely different from developers. And with developers, we want them to break, to do whatever, and try things and report bugs and stuff. In the artist case, probably you don't want to do that. You want to handle it with care. That meaning that if you have previous files that you want to work on, just make sure that if it's going to be like production work, don't use the beta, basically. If it's you are working on something that just duplicate the original file first, just in case you have a backup, or if you have any other methods of backupping, just it's better, but at least have some sort of backup somehow, and then just try export, see how it works. We haven't checked. We have done some tests on really complex scenes, but I'm sure that a lot of scenes out there that we haven't, with a lot of corner cases that we haven't really checked because we might miss some things. So that will be really helpful if artists can try with all scenes, with like scenes that are using the previous add-on version, and report. We have seen some reports already in Discord from people seeing some having some issues, or so that's really helpful because those cases we haven't really tested those that much. So that's important thing.
Especially Blender 3.2, because that came out late during the development process, so it hasn't received nearly as much testing. But
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and yeah, also has done some issues of its own. Like at least I've seen like really slow exporting times. I haven't looked into it deeply yet, but something that.
There's just been a corrective release for Blender 3.2, so things may be better. But
that's good. Yeah, I haven't. I actually I'm not using it for right now because I'm still using the previous version. But yeah. Also, like in theory, the add-on supports Blender 3.2.0. Actually, the test, the functional tests from that we saw before, they are run during continuous integration. They are run on 3 different add-on versions. So, well, just for completion, if you go to, for example, any pull request, then you will see that here now this is this tick. And here, if you go to any pull request, you will see, or actually any commit, then you will see that there is a few steps. You can go to details there. This is all the GitHub actions, the workflow. So right now we are running tests on Blender 2.939, Blender 3.1.2, or Blender 3.2.0. So this way we make sure that at least the component export works fine in these different versions. That was not the case at the beginning, so having the test case definitely helped for this. I remember at the beginning there was some differences in the exported from 3.2.0, and that require some updates in the add-on, and that was flagged by the tests. So they are actually working pretty well for these cases, especially when testing new add-on versions. So we will definitely keep on adding versions as they are released to make sure that it works in as many versions as possible.
And a quick question from Chris. Do you know if the video texture thing was corrected in 3.2?
Not as far as I know. Yeah, Chris mentioned during the production of the awesome list kickoff scene for the party on Tuesday. I was working with the video texture component on 3.2, and it was not working. It was not exporting. I did look into it a little bit. I've been meaning to create an issue with what I found, but basically, if you have custom properties on, it will. The add-on has changed so that it does a Python deep copy of the material, and Python doesn't like the Blender object that we have linked into the add-on component. Like, you have to choose the source, and Python's deep copy does not like that if extra properties is on, and then if it is not enabled, it just does not work for some reason in Hubs, and I have not yet diagnosed that. why that's happening yet, but
Yeah, I haven't really looked into it. Well, maybe if Chris, if you can open an issue, or maybe if you mentioned that in the Discord channel, I can take a look. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna one of the things that I'm gonna do now is like try to open as many issues as we can in the GitHub repository. Mostly because if we bring more developers or contributors into the platform, then that's having the issues organized there and visible for everybody, and so everybody knows who's working on what is going to be pretty important. So yeah,
Yep.
opening issues for as many things. I will open things whenever they are reported Discord channel, but if you want to report it directly in GitHub and then link that into Discord channel, that would be awesome because then we have it already there.
yeah, and I'll open an issue for that one because I've already done some preliminary exploration.
Yeah, that would be awesome because then you can, or anybody can take the. Well,
Yeah.
I guess I can say I'm working on this, and then we can have it more organized.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So basically that this big when artists be careful, don't use it for production work. Don't make a copy of your scene or have a backup somehow, and just like let us know in the Discord channel, or just like add new issues into the repository, and that would be great.
Yes, but do use it. It has already been used in some production scenes. Like Chris and we were working with it for the Awesome List party scene, and it held up pretty well. So, but yeah, definitely test it and use it. Just handle it with care, so you don't lose any data or screw anything up.
Yeah, I'd use it. Well, I mean, this is scene that I put together for the live stream. This is made with the latest add-on version, and it worked pretty well. And especially as I mentioned for audio songs and media frames was super useful. So yeah, I found like a couple of issues, but mostly I think I didn't find major issues. But this is quite a simple scene, so I'm not using things like light maps because I didn't really have time or any complex things, so it shouldn't trigger many issues. But yeah, so far I think it's working pretty okay. So yeah, I mean for artists, the other things, major differences, but as I mentioned, the album hasn't changed from the outside that much. It's basically the same interfaces with icons, but yeah, we mentioned about Gizmos. That's an improvement. We saw how they look, and then one thing that we talk about with Imaginer at some point in the past is adding more visual cues or helping artists or assisting them better when creating content. There are certain components that right now they don't have any visual feedback, and it's not easy to replicate the exact same visuals of the Hubs client in Blender. So it requires quite some work. It can be done, but it requires a lot of work. But there's some things I think will be more easily done than others. For example, the UV scroll, the UV scroll add-on, which is basically like scrolling the tester. That could be something that we could do in the viewport, and that's the thing that will help artists a lot to have a better idea, a better sense of how the scene will look in the Hubs client and reduce the iteration times. So I think that will be there is a few components that we can improve to have more visual feedback. I added here like a Hubs play button. I can imagine that if you want to see how it looks in or play, you can play those components that have like extra visual feedback and then see how it looks. For example, like particle systems or UV scroll. The audio feedback, we can simulate some scale in the object to simulate that audio feedback. So there's certain things that we can do. We just haven't done it yet, but that definitely has room for improvement in the visual feedback.
Yeah, there's been some work on that already. I have a UV scroll thing. I had it working mostly for the old add-on, so I'll probably
great.
pull request for that sometime soon, and people can have a look at that, or I'll get around to finishing it at some point.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I will open some new features in the repository for these things, the things that we think that might be doable with not a lot of work. Because, for example, particle systems might require much more work, but UV scroll could be, I think it's something doable. So yeah, definitely like adding more issues for these things we'll have to keep it organized in the repository of these ideas. So yeah, sorry?
And text rendering shouldn't be too hard. Blender has a nice thing for text rendering in the viewport, so
yeah, that's another one that probably would be nice to have. Yeah, so well, there's a note here for myself mostly like it will be nice to improve the visual fidelity and as close as the Hubs client one as possible and reduce the iteration times. This is always like a pain point for artists. Another improvement for artists is the visual feedback. So it's now we have things like warnings for components inside the panels. We have better UI for things like tracks, shapes, which was kind of a pain, as imaginary can probably tell. And units consistency, which you didn't have before, so now you can see the right units.
yes.
So, for
That is
example,
nice.
let me go back here. Yeah, so for example, let's see, say that you have this and you add like a UV scroll component. Okay, no, this one already has like.
Wait, go back to that. I want to show the UV scroll. It now has the X and Y labels, which is something I really missed before. And it also has a warning that it requires the texture.
Yeah, that was didn't have the XY before? I don't remember.
No, it didn't. Before it was just blank, and if you had the Python tooltip enabled, you'd get like 0 and 1 as the increment, and so very artist friendly. But now it's so nice to see those labels there.
Yeah, I didn't remember that. Yeah, so this is one of the things, visual feedback. Like now, if the component is missing some data, then you're gonna, in most cases, maybe we miss some cases, but in most cases we try to add warnings for everything. So in this case, this component requires a texture, so it's pretty evident that you have to go to material, and then it doesn't have material, so you need to add a material, and this material doesn't have a texture, so you still get a warning, and then you can yes, viewport display. Right.
Yeah.
So here you add the image tester, the grid, and then you go back, and now it should be okay. So that's helpful. You avoid a lot of issues with exporting something, loading in-house, and then this doesn't work. Why? And finding why until you realize that it's just we didn't have a texture somehow. But in this case, it would be pretty easy because you usually have a texture because that's something that you do. But some other cases can be helpful. For example, media frames and audio songs are in the past I found really tricky because you didn't really know how it looks. Now with the Gizmos, that's better. But if the scale of the, for example, media frame in this case is not 1 then you will have issues in the Hubs client. So, for example, if you scale this, now the component is gonna warn you that the media frame scale needs to be 1. Otherwise, it's not gonna match in Hubs. So yeah, now there's more information, more warnings and stuff. Another thing that we have improved is when working with some components, for example, the morph audio feedback. These components require specific data from the object. In this case, it's a shape. In other cases, in the loop animation case, is a track, an elite track. So now instead of writing manually the name, so you have to go look. If you change the name, then you don't have information about that. So now you can choose directly the shape keys or the tracks. So in this case, these have no tracks. We can add quickly a track. Go here. Actually, push it down, and then now we should see the NLA track here. And now that track gets added, and you don't have to write it manually and keep track of that. I think this is a small usability improvement, but I think it's probably people are going to appreciate it. The same way, if you add like a shape key, you go here and you add the shape key here. Then if you go to the component, now you should be able to see the shape key here. And what's this warning up here? Something broke. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. Well, then you can choose just the key there. Yeah. If you remove the key somehow, then it will say no matching shape key found. So that way you can go, and then you don't have any shape keys available, so you can choose any. But that is more helpful. Now it's fixed. Somehow this select shape key wasn't working. Look at that. But in general, this that idea having more visual feedback for artists. I think this helps. This improves that a little bit. So now you have more information about what's wrong. We could do other things in the future, like if whenever we have gizmos for everything, we can tint the gizmo in red, for example, and then that way you can visually see that component has issues, and you have to look into it. So definitely, it's much more we can do. We can improve on the usability and visual feedback side. But yeah, this is just a start. Okay, and then there's probably like most of the things that I want to touch for artists. I'm sorry if I'm missing, but as with the developer part, any feedback that you have, or any things, any features that you want to see, or we have links, or we should keep in mind is there's no in the Discord channel or open issues or feature requests in the GitHub repository, and that's always really helpful to have all that feedback. And yeah, knowing if you will find this new version also useful, and so yeah, anything that you just let us know. And now we can jump a bit to the roadmap. So there's a few things that we have done, but this first iteration on the on the add-on, the new add-on, was mostly focused on the new architecture. So nothing substantial has changed, or not many big features has been added. So it's like a foundation for the next iterations. So that we're at the point now where after we tested a bit more and people tested, it gets more stable. We're on a release, and then after that, there's a few things that we would like to add during the rest of the year. Imaginary here has been working on the importer support, which is super important. I've always missed that. That's a key part of the add-on. It was kind of incomplete with that, mostly because I think before Explorer wasn't really a good way of looking into the import, the GNT import system. So I think it wasn't really easily doable, but now it is, and well, Imaginer here has a PR available that I have to review, and probably that will be available. Well, not sure when, but when that gets reviewed and it's ready to merge. And that's really great because that will allow us to basically share more. So people can share their scenes, GLBs, and you can import that. You can get GLBs from Hubs and then load them in the Blender, and you will get all the components, and the actual scene information will be there, which right now is not the case. You can get the scene in GLB format, but you can't really load it in Blender because you will lose all the Hubs component information. So that's a super critical part. Super critical, especially because in the future we want to do more things that require GLB import. And so this is the big next step, is adding support for GLB Hubs components import. Yeah. So well, thanks Imaginer here because he's put quite some time on that, and that's going to be super helpful for a lot of people.
Oh, you're welcome. And the pull request, it is up there for people to take a look at, and it has been updated to the new architecture to work with that. So should be able to have fun with that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be super useful. Well, next thing also, like on the visual side, more Gizmos. We're working on Gizmos for the rest of the components. So that should be whenever the artist team is done with that, and should be relatively fast to add because it's. So yeah, that's another thing that will come, having completing the visual feedback for all the components. Then another thing that we want to add, and I think it's also quite important, especially for people that are not so familiar with Hubs like scene or avatar creation inside Blender, which is having an asset library, which we are also working on. So that means that there will be a place where you can see like a list of templates. So a scene template, an avatar template, different scene types, different component setups, because there are some components that might be not that easy to set up. For example, the video texture, target, and source. Then it requires a certain. We have improved that, but it still requires knowing what you need to add to what and linking both things. So I think having a library of components and templates, scene and avatar templates, will be quite nice for people, just to people not familiar to start start working with the add-on and creating content. So yeah, that should be relatively easy to make because it's just in Blender creating assets library is straightforward, and it's just a matter of like time. So the artist team has some time to work on that, and we will get the assets library and incorporate it in the add-on. And then probably the next big thing that we really would love to work on is the cloud integration. Well, right now, any artist out there using the Blender add-on probably will agree that it's kind of a pain, the scene iteration. So you have to export the scene, grab that, and since Dom added the bug locally scene flag, that got much better because that you can just drag that GLB in the Hubs client and then just see the scene in action. But still, if you want to upload the scene, you have to go through Spoke, and that requires like opening the Spoke, going to import, dragging, adding the screenshot, and then import, and then all those steps. So I think we can do much better on that side. So linking your add-on with your Hubs Cloud account, and having a panel where you can sync bidirectionally any Blender scene. I think that's probably one of the next big things. So artists don't really need to leave Blender that often to just upload and download content. Automatic components asset upload, that's also kind of a pain now. If you want to add like an audio in the Blender scene now, you have to add the Blender the Hubs audio component here. So you need to go here and say like, okay, I want an audio. But yeah, the audio URL is just a URL, and Blender doesn't know anything about the assets that you want to use. So ideally, this will be a local asset that you can open with a file browser, and then you have the path there, and then whenever you sync that scene with the cloud, then that component that asset will be automatically uploaded to your Hubs account, and then we will upload the scene, and the scene will have the correct URL without you needing to do anything at all. So that's also kind of a thing that will save a lot of time to people, especially when dealing with assets. Assets per processing. That's another thing that would be nice. For example, texture compression can be tricky also. You have to go over some other hops outside Blender, because Blender doesn't really support. Sorry?
This is for the GPU compression, right? The basis?
Yeah, for basis compression. Yeah, so now you have to go through the GLB tools, or this compiler tool. Yeah, or do it manually, which could be like a kind of a pain. But yeah, so that sort of pre-processing when you upload the scene from Blender to the cloud, I think that will be quite nice. We can do several things there, and probably texture compression is the most important one. But yeah, definitely that would be nice if you can just like check in the export panel, say like, or the sync panel, you can say, oh, I want to upload this scene, but I want to check this box which says like, I want my textures to be compressed. Then you just do it from there, and you don't have to go over the hops of doing it outside Blender. Sorry.
That might be our first export option. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think it'll be nice, and also you don't have to install tools locally, which for artists especially can be pretty painful, because I think most of the people that use texture compression might be really familiar, very tech savvy, but if you are just like an artist and you don't want to deal with texture compression tools in the command line or stuff like that, probably. So yeah, I think having all those slightly more complicated processes in the backend side, in the cloud side, that could be helpful for artists. So yeah, this is a glimpse of some things. There's some more things. This is also like providing translation for different languages, because not everybody speaks English. And things like that. So that could be This is just like the most important ones, like syncing, automatic component upload, and stuff like that. And for example, a scene, this is basically inside the syncing part, but remixing the scenes. Right now, you can't remix the scenes in the Blender. You can do it in Spoke, but you can't Blender. So I think it will be also very nice for artists to go and see, this is I want to look for scenes about this thing, and then just click on the scene. Automatically, we take that, we download that GLB, and we load it inside Blender, and then you can remix that scene. So that will be quite nice also. So yeah, I think cloud integration is a pretty big one, but I think it's gonna be could be great to have that. So But yeah, well, the last one is improving the preview. So as I mentioned, right now the most straightforward way of previewing your scene, the Blender scene in Hubs is just exporting and then dragging it on the Hubs client using the back locally seen flag. But that's still not super fast. So I haven't really put much thought yet on this, but improving those iteration times and the preview times, either or both adding more visual feedback inside Blender, but also making it faster to preview the scenes. So in my head, that will look like something like click a preview button, and then you have like a browser window opening, and then your scene is there. No, that type of you can
nice.
you can have two screens, and you will have like a browser window on one, the Blender opening the other, just like click on preview, and instantly you can see the scene in the Hubs client on the other screen. So ideally, that would be my ideal preview, the way of previewing the scene. But we need to look deeper into that to see what can we do. But something like that would be very nice to have. But yeah, that's basically what we have in mind for the rest of the year. There's some other smaller tasks, that's the big picture mostly. Well, I don't know if there are any other questions that were asked during the rest of the live stream. If anybody wants to ask or say anything.
Yeah. Is there anything we haven't thought of, or any pain points we should know about that you found?
I guess we got a comment, quick reloading, drag and drop, such a nice feature. That drag and drop local, like kind of reloading GLBs.
Yeah.
You mean the flag with the back local scene flag?
I think they mean just a comment from the Twitch chat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's probably about local debugging, which is a query stream parameter we use to drag and drop a GLB onto a scene so you can test it locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the back local scene parameter. Yeah, that's super useful.
It is.
Yeah, that definitely improves the iteration times quite a lot. But it would be nice to know how will artists, or what will be their ideal way of working with the Blender add-on. I would like to hear that actually from other artists. In their heads, what would be the ideal way that they will work with the Blender add-on and the Hubs client? That's, I mean, in my head, we have talked internally, like having that sort of like preview button that will be already quite nice. But yeah, or in general, about like everything that we talk about today, like having feedback or ideas from especially from artists also, because they are the ones that use this tool every day. So that would be pretty nice.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Imaginer, Manuel, coming in, showing us how to dev on the add-on, showing us what all the new architecture means. Much appreciated. And again, the Discord calendar, we're going to be doing more live streams like this in the future, and you can just check the Discord calendar there or follow us on Twitch and Twitter.
Okay. Well, thanks, Imaginer.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
Yep. I'll see you. Discord and Discord. Bye, everybody.